Hey, welcome to the Real Estate Pessimist Podcast. My name is Eric Stenbakken, and I'm one of the pessimists here. We're here to tell you about the good, bad, and the truth about real estate investing. And my co-host here, Kristi Kandel.
I'm Kristi Kandel, and I've been a real estate developer for nearly 20 years and a real estate investor since 2017. And today, what we really want to get into is what was that discomfort or the fear that drove us into becoming real estate investors in the first place? Eric, why don't you maybe give a little bit more background?
All right. The short story is I just got introduced to some people who were doing it. I didn't understand it at all. It didn't make any sense to me. And so I ignored it. The longer version is I've been an entrepreneur for years and working my butt off, right? I was a commercial photographer and I got into video production. And so everything I did for work was fee for service, straight up. Like if I'm not out there in the hamster wheel running, there is no money being generated. Straight up. I get off the hamster wheel for a vacation, the money stops. There's just not much else, right? I had a thousand images in stock photos, but if you know anything about photography, stock photos went from maybe a couple $100 a piece down to 5 cents. I got royalty payments as little as 1 cent per image. Like, well, you can't retire on that, right? You just can't. So what happened is a combination of things. We had some friends and we had heard them say that they owned 10 homes. I was like, 10 properties? Like, oh, don't get all excited. We bought these in Western Nebraska. They're like $30,000 each. And we put between 0 down, 5% down, and maybe 10% down. So I was like, oh, okay, right. So you could buy a used car for what you guys bought 10 houses for, right? So, and they weren't renting for a lot. So I kind of dismissed it. Then my wife and I were going to move. We were looking to move to another town, only about 30 minutes away. And the real estate agent we were with took us around and we were looking at properties and he'd say, every once in a while, it's like, oh, that's one of my properties. Oh, that's one of my properties. And after a while, I'm like, well, wait a minute, how much of this town do you own? And he said, well, I have 80 properties. And my mind was just like, what? Like a person can own 80 properties? Now people will say, well, that's so greedy. That's horrible. Bad landlord, blah, 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 all that stuff. Okay, picture this though. He rented to university students who would pay him probably $400 a month in rent. 0 of those people could go out and buy any of these assets, right? So their option was, I don't know, live in a tent down by the river, or they could rent from him for a couple $100 a month and live in a really nice house. So he provided a valuable asset for these people.
And you started to understand through that, wait, you can own a ton of housing. You're not taking away from anyone else. You're actually adding an added benefit. And hey, wait, there's another way to make income. You can own 80 properties? What?
It was slow to sink in, I'll be honest with you, because first of all, I was like, 80, how can that even be? And he said, well, I have my own little management company, people who work for me. And I was like, oh, wow. But see, it was still so far outside of my awareness that I didn't really know how that could work. So fast forward, we went back to our friend's house that they had the 10 properties. And they said, we want to play a game with you. And it's called Cashflow. And it is developed by Kiyosaki, the guy who co-wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Have you played it, Kristi?
I have not, but I have read all the books.
Okay, you've read all the books. So you get the principle of it. I had read Rich Dad, Poor Dad a decade or so before this. But my takeaway from that book was very different. I mean, I was exposed to real estate, but that book didn't fire me up for real estate for whatever reason. I got a different takeaway from that. And in my family's history, my grandparents owned one rental and it went badly for them. My parents owned a property that they moved out of and they rented it out and it didn't go super awesome for them either. In the back of my head was kind of like this, it's a hassle, it doesn't really work kind of a thing. So we're playing this game, Cashflow. It's kind of like Monopoly. You get a job and you get paid when you pass payday. But what's a little bit different about this game is you have expenses that you pay. And the expenses are relative to the income that you get. Not everybody in the game gets the same income, but not everybody in the game has the same expenses either. Okay? And so what it boils down to is that your expenses end up being about 90%, I don't know what the percentage is exactly, of what you get when you pass payday. And there's two circles in the game. There's an inner circle, which is the rat race. And you make money, you spend money, you make money, you spend money, and that's it. That's just all you do. And there's an outer circle. And the way you get to the outer circle is you have to have passive income that exceeds your active expenses. So let's suppose your active expenses in the game are $5,000 per month as you go around this inner circle. Well, over the course of the game, you have opportunities to buy a business, to buy real estate, to invest in assets. And you can do this a little bit at a time. And one of the things I noticed in the game is that when you bought stocks, you had to buy all the stocks. If you bought $100,000 worth of stocks, you had to have $100,000 to buy the stock. But here's the crazy thing. In real estate, I could buy a $100,000 asset for only $20,000. I was like, wait. So if I sell this property later in the game for $150,000, I paid $20,000. I sell it for $150,000. What? The leverage, this is crazy. And so I was like, well, it's a game, right? So I'll just play the game. I see how the game works. I'll play the game. So I just got aggressive. Fine, I'm going to buy real estate. I just went kind of crazy in the game. My passive income exceeded my active expenses in the game. And I went to the outer circle where all the investments, I think it's either 10x or X, just goes up. Everything gets multiplied. And I was like, well, that's fantasy. That just does not happen. And they're like, yeah, it's like secret doors open to you once you're in that lane. I didn't believe that until years later. And I was like, no, that's actually true. When you are playing in that area, your opportunities open up. But anyways, let's circle back. I played that game, and on the way home, my wife and I were talking in the car, and I said, wait, if this is how actual economy works, we are doing this wrong. We're doing this wrong because you have to keep working. My wife worked in medicine and I worked as a photographer. And I mean, on the average photo shoot that I would go on, I don't know, I've got 100, 150 pounds of gear and I've got to carry some of that. I roll it around on a cart and I'm like, I'm going to be lifting all this stuff. There was one gig I did where we worked, I want to say it was about a 14-hour day. We walked 10 miles and I shot over 2,000 images. I'm like, I can't keep doing this forever.
Nope.
There's no way. And I played that game and I realized I'm going to be doing this forever if I don't figure something else out.
I want to point out that you said, I am playing the game wrong. You were playing the game you were told to play. You were actually
That's
following
right.
all the rules, doing everything they said. But what happened was you then had a new opportunity and your concepts expand to go, whoa, there's a different way to play this game. And this is how you actually win this game.
So what ended up happening is a few months later, I was doing a photo shoot for a local publication and they were featuring local business people. Well, I met a real estate agent who worked for the company that had been taking me around to look for new houses. Well, it turns out we did not buy a new house. We did not buy a new property. We stayed right where we were, but we had been saving money. And when I met this other real estate agent, I said, so do you do anything with investment properties? He's like, yeah, I can set you up with an investment property. I was like, okay, well, we've been saving some money. Maybe instead of us building our dream house, we'll put our money into investments. And then we could do something else later on in life. So we bought our first rental property. And that changed everything. But before we get to that, Kristi, how did you get started? I know a little bit about your background here, but it's fascinating. What was that discomfort moment for you when you realized, wait a minute, if I keep doing the thing, like you said, following the rules, society, business just tells you, work hard, Kristi, just do the things, save a little bit of money, make sure you save a little more than you spend, and just keep doing that and do that for 68 years or 65 or whatever it is. And then you can slow down a little bit. What was it that turned the lights on for you? And you're like, oh, wait a minute, maybe I've been playing the game wrong.
Well, mine was a gradual progression as well, because what I've learned is as we have to understand the basic concepts to then be able to level up along the way. So I grew up in a small, very small town in Ohio, and financial literacy wasn't there outside of, hey, make sure that you keep your credit score really high so that way you can have the opportunity so you can get that apartment, and your credit score is like your reputation. Great. I'm going to have a great credit score. I'm going to have a $500 credit card and I'm always going to pay it off. And that's the only way I'm going to leverage debt. And the other thing was, we did grow up with not a lot of money. So what me and my siblings ended up doing was, how do we get into a field and a career where we can make enough money to where we're not wondering how we're going to put food on the table. And if we want to buy something, we'll just go buy it. Okay, well, that also leads to you've got your income going up, but your expenses are going up. And I always was right in the middle to where until I started my company, I probably was sitting on $1,000 to $3,000 worth of debt on the credit card that I would constantly be paying off, but I couldn't ever get ahead of that. And to keep that completely separate from the 75 grand of student loan debt. So I was leveling up my income and my knowledge, but my expenses were creeping up all the same in the game because I knew that I could keep making money. I was living in great places across the country. And then my first test into this was I finally decided, and actually to back up, growing up, I really fast forwarded through hey, why are we going to spend 40 years of our life and our best time of our life, physically, mentally, like, why are we going to commit that all to a job only to retire? And then I get to start living once I retire, like, then I'm old and broken. I'm not going to want to skydive then. I'm not going to want to hike Kilimanjaro. Like, what? This seems crazy to me. So I actually remember one of my good friends who was about 10 years older than me. She had said, talk to my financial advisor. Now that you're starting to make real money, then you can get an idea. And I actually got in a fight with him, was like, I don't want to use you anymore, because he wanted all my money to go into the 401k. And I was like, where's my vacation money? I need this. Excuse me, sir. He said, no, you need to put the money away. And we just fundamentally disagreed. I'm like, I will save, but I will not save everything, because life has to be worth living before I'm 65 or 67 or whatever retirement age is. So I do remember, and I remember years later going back and being like, hey, buddy, look, it worked. And he's like, yeah, you're an anomaly. So I knew that there was a disconnect. I didn't know how to get to it.
So do you really think that you're an anomaly? Do you think like you and me are just like freaks of nature that made this happen? Or was there something that we were willing to do? Some change we were willing to make and step out, that we're the anomaly, not because it's impossible, but because we took a step? What do you think?
That's a great point. The reason we're the anomaly is we were willing to feel the fear and do it anyway. We were willing to do completely opposite of what we were told, because we knew in the back of our minds that, hey, there's this is not a linear outcome. It's not go this way and we'll keep going 1 + 1 + 1. It's like multiplication as opposed to addition. So, and it doesn't happen. You don't go from 0 to 100. Like for me, it was baby steps. So for me, I started my own company in 2015, and then I got to a point towards the end of 2016 where my CPA and I have a CPA, what? But yeah, I had a CPA and we were doing tax strategy planning. He was like, we can only put so much money in a SEP IRA. Like, you need more things that we can create write-offs and deductions from. And I said, well, what do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? He's like, you need to go buy property. He's like, you're renting. He's like, you need to buy something. He was able to give me just enough information, because he had a couple rentals, but he definitely didn't specialize in it. And it made me go, wait, I can have this really large tax bill that I have to pay, or I can take that amount of money, put it into a property that I live in. And I didn't know the term house hack or Airbnb at the time, but I was in Tahoe. So and I was going to LA every other week. So 2 weeks in Tahoe, 2 weeks in LA, found the perfect townhome that I could buy where I could live in the second floor, Airbnb the first floor, share the common area on top. And that would then also create this magical depreciation. And all of a sudden, when he did my taxes, he's like, yeah, all that money you were going to give to Uncle Sam, he's like, you now invested in the property. Your tax bill is almost minuscule compared to what it would have been. And when I looked at the numbers, that short-term rental paid my HOA, my mortgage, and my utilities. I live for free. I hadn't paid the taxes and I own an asset. What?
Right. And so I want to circle back to something that you just said there about being the anomaly and stepping out and going against conventional wisdom. This is really important, is that we were going against conventional assumed wisdom. We're not making this stuff up. There are thousands, there are millions of people who are doing what we're doing. It's not like we're the one-offs, right? There are people out there who teach this, who explain this. There are books about this. It's a thing that can actually be done. We didn't just luck into this. We followed the advice and information of other people. I mean, Kristi, your CPA told you about this. Shoot, I played a game that told me about this. There are other people out there who know this and know that it works. I want to give this example. It's kind of like if you have seen black and white all your life. Have you ever seen those videos where somebody puts on the glasses that allow them to see color, right? It's kind of like all of a sudden, here's the thing is for that person, the world was shades of black and white with some I'm not an optometrist, right? So I can't explain all that, but you've seen the videos and you understand it's like they have been used to seeing the world in one way and they got used to that. And they put on these new glasses and all of a sudden they're like, whoa, holy cow, there's all this other stuff out there. Like it's mind blowing. And financially, that's the way it is too, is that we've been told our whole lives, well, just work hard, save money. If you're a good person, boy, girl, you keep your credit good. You just make sure that you don't get in too much consumer debt. And that's it. That's living the good life. And then all of a sudden we meet people who put those glasses on and we're like, whoa, wait a minute. What? We can be saving on taxes. We can leverage income through real estate. We can get deductions. Like, what is this world? But it's real. And I want to point out is that we usually don't take that step until we're aware of it, right? We got to be aware of it first. But then we have to come up against some sort of discomfort where like, well, if I go into real estate, something could go wrong, right? Something could happen. But then we're faced with the awareness. Well, if I don't do something, I know that that's going to go wrong. Like for me, it was like, I'm going to be hauling tons of camera gear into a dwindling marketplace until I'm the old sad guy that people are like, oh man, that's sad that he's got to do that. And I realized that was going to be me unless I took some steps. And for you,
Yeah,
sounds like you're
mine was the fact that when I realized I was going to be paying a six-figure tax bill, first of all, I never dreamed of even making that kind of income in my life, but let alone I would work so hard at my own company to build a business that ended up doing phenomenal and then have to give that away. I was like, oh, no. I need to start educating myself in what this is because I worked way too hard to just give it away and say, okay, well, that sucks. But the interesting thing too is that this just started to open the doors. Today, Eric and I have a wealth of information, but it was baby steps. This started to open the door to the next level of understanding that then I went, One of my friends then said, hey, start listening to Bigger Pockets. By doing that, I was able to hear everyone's stories and how their life story was and their journey and how they bought different property. And it started making this whole new world manageable. And it made it seem normal to where maybe that is possible.
You bring up a good point. And let's face it, the percentage of people who are doing what we're doing, it is small. And so the chances that people on your Facebook feed are going to understand leveraging debt and taking advantage of the 100-hour loophole and cost segregation studies, it's probably nobody. So you do need to find people who normalize this kind of personal change. There's I will take steps to overcome my fears. I will take steps to overcome the status quo. I'm going to keep moving. Once you find those people, realize, oh no, there are people who do this. There are a lot of people actually who do this. And you start hanging around them. That helps ease the fears, yes. Right? Imagine if you had never seen anybody ride a bicycle before. And they said, oh yeah, you see that metal device over there with two wheels? We're just going to hop on it and go for 50 miles. You'd be like, That's insanity. Now, we've all seen bicycles, right? So we know how they work. But if you never had, that would seem impossible. Like, well, how are you going to balance on that thing? Obviously, it just tips over one way or the other. Like, that's not going to work until you see somebody do it. And you see them do it, and you're like, dang, that's magical. And then you ride a bike, and then you have somebody else show you a unicycle. Well, now that's impossible. Like, no one can do that until you see somebody do it. Okay, well, it is harder, but it is possible. And that's kind of how this financial thing is that it seems impossible until you meet people who are doing it and you see people do it. And there are people who will help you, no matter what asset class it is or where you are in your journey. There are people, tens of thousands, who have been there where you are now that have made it work. So, Kristi, I want to ask you, what did that first deal do for you?
The first deal did so much for me. It turned out to be a house hack because I was living in it, but also renting out rooms. Because of a friend that I got introduced to in Tahoe, she was short-term rentaling some of her units. And so she's like, well, just short-term rent the first floor instead of getting long-term tenants. So if you want family and friends to come visit, you still have that ability. I was like, I don't know how. She's like, I'll help you set it up. And she was amazing at that. So a short-term rental. It didn't have to pay taxes because I rolled it into another investment and leveraged all of the tax benefits of real estate. I never even contemplated owning property before because I never wanted to feel tied down. I never wanted to have roots somewhere. I was the black sheep of the family. I love to travel. I love adventure. I mean, the Tim McGraw song "Live Like You Were Dying" came on when I worked at Cracker Barrel in college, and we heard skydiving in that song, and so we went skydiving. So like, I like to be a very free spirit like that. If I hear something that sounds exciting and interesting and challenging, I want to do it. So that property was able to just really open my eyes to what was possible. I was able to exit from that property and I paid off those student loans. I remember to this day sitting on top of Heavenly Ski Resort in 2019, taking a picture going, oh my gosh, that ball and chain of my student loans that I always joked that some sugar daddy would pay off someday. Turns out I was the sugar daddy. I just had to become a real estate investor. The funny part is I had been in real estate my entire career, but we were developers. So we came into communities, we built something, we sold it. I had never held anything. And now I was having my eyes open to, whoa, there's a reason to hold. There's a reason to have this. So it was so powerful for me. But what about you? What long-term benefits did you get from that first deal, Eric?
What comes to mind is when I taught my daughter to ride a bike. And she's wobbly and she's got the training wheels on and she's cruising around the neighborhood. And then it's scary, right? It's scary to take off the training wheels. Well, we took off the training wheels and I'm running along beside her, and I'm holding those handlebars looser and looser and looser until I'm running beside her, but not holding the handlebars. And she realizes she's doing this on her own. And that look on her, and she just took off. Like, she was gone. And the training wheels were never going back on, ever. And I remember buying our first property. It was a single family home. Nothing amazing or sexy about it. It's in a regular neighborhood. We found it on the MLS. We fixed up a little bit of things on it, but not much. I mean, it needed new countertops, I think, is one of the major, and just cleaned up is what we did. Absolutely nothing fancy or amazing about it. Yeah, we didn't do all the amazing, like we didn't buy it way under market value. Yeah, we got a decent deal on it. But I remember when I got the first rent check, I just collected it in person, and I was standing in the sidewalk right in front of that house, and I knew what my mortgage payment was. I don't know what that was back then, $1,200 on a 15-year amortization. And I realized that I got a rent check for $1,500 or $1,700. I don't remember what it was. And I remember thinking, wait a minute. This is a machine where you put in a quarter and you get out 30 cents. Like, well, if I put in another quarter and I get out 30 cents, pretty soon I'm going to have enough change to put in 2 quarters at a time. And then wait a minute. And then just my head exploded. I'm like, well, oh, we're doing this. We're going. It's like being on the bike and realizing the training wheels are off. But there's almost no such thing as a real estate investor who owns one property. If they do it and they do it as an investor. Now, I'm going to qualify this because my parents had owned one place that they rented, but they didn't do it as an investor. It was an accident. The market's down. We can't sell this house. What do we do? They just listed it for rent. The disaster they had is somebody just moved rabbits into the house. And so downstairs was kind of nasty by the time these people moved out. But that was it. And they ended up selling the house for more than they paid for it, and it worked out okay. My grandparents, wonderful people, but they didn't do any of the things that you should do as a landlord, background checks and deposits and visiting the property. They didn't do any of that stuff. So it turned out less than stellar for them. Again, they didn't go broke because of it. So there's that class, but people who go into it with intent, like I'm going to buy a property, I'm going to make this an investment, I'm going to just at least get an outline from some other people about what to do. There's almost none of that class that ends up only owning one. Because once they buy one and they realize how it actually works, they're like, nope, training wheels are not going back on. And it just opens the doors. For me, we kept that house for about 10 years or so. And by this time, we had bought more long-term rentals. And we had bought a couple of short-term rentals. When we saw what the short-term rentals were doing versus what our long-term rentals were doing and how much those long-terms had appreciated in value, here's the crazy thing that just blew my mind. I'm like, wait a minute, wait. This house made way more money in appreciation than it ever did in rent. And guess what? Appreciation happens when I'm sleeping, happens when I'm on the beach, it happens when I'm backpacking, and it happens without any of my work whatsoever. And I was like, this is amazing. So we sold several of our long terms and did a 1031, which, if you're not familiar with that, it's a tax deferral strategy. You don't avoid taxes. You're just telling the government, hold on, I'm going to reinvest this money. We don't get to have the money. In fact, the rules say that you're not allowed to ever even touch the money. The money doesn't go into your bank account at all. It's a little bit scary and a little bit weird, but it works. And so you reallocate the money from one place to another. And so that's what we did into a big short-term rental in Tennessee. And that place sleeps 20. The pictures that I show people, it looks a bit like a hotel. People would look at the picture and go, wait a minute. So a group can rent that entire building? I know. It's nuts. And it's all decked out. That first deal opened the door to me to thinking, this is what's possible. This actually works. We discovered some tax strategies. And Kristi, to your earlier point, this is a growing process. We took this to our CPA and we said, well, how about this? And so we threw some terms at her that we had been hearing. And she's like, I don't know anything about that. I don't know. And basically she's just like, I'm going to close my eyes and just pretend you didn't ask that. I don't know. And we realized it's time to go a level up on our CPA and get someone who really knows how to take advantage of this.
And did you ever think, I'll have a CPA? No. So you had a CPA. And then what? We outgrew our CPA. That's a thing. And that's where the power of being in these real estate groups and finding people who talk the same language and do the same things. In one of the groups, I said, I'm pretty sure I probably need a new CPA because I think the strategies that I'm putting out, he's not understanding. And again, our tax code is so big and complex. These guys cannot be experts at every part. That's why it's a good thing to outgrow them. By being in that group, I was able to find a new CPA. And instead of my head exploding after an hour call and not feeling like we had accomplished anything, I now had a CPA that I was like, I have a clear strategy and action. So how far into your investing journey did it take you, Eric, to outgrow your CPA?
When we were doing just single family rentals, we were okay with our CPA. She was able to get her head around what that was, and it was fairly straightforward. But then once we got into out of state and short-term rentals, she was not aware of it. And one of the first things she says, well, you gotta pay this corporate tax for out of state. And we're like, I'm pretty sure we don't. She's like, oh yeah, you got to pay this. I don't know what it was, $7,000. I really think that's not true. So we started asking around, people like, no, you file this paperwork and you do this in this timely way, and you don't have to pay that. And we're like, okay, it's time to move. Then we shopped for CPAs that were specific to real estate investing and out of state and all this other stuff. And I heard how much they cost. I'm like, that's a lot of money to pay a CPA. And we did a consultation with them and we said, yeah, we think we can save you about this much in taxes. So I pay you X and you save me X times 5. All right, where do we sign up? And they did. They were not cheap, but because of their specialized knowledge, they were able to save us more taxes than we would have by, quote, saving the money going with a cheaper CPA. So going with a more expensive CPA, ironically, ended up with more money in our bank account than if we had gone the cheap route. That took a little while to do that. I think, in hearing what you're saying is that taking the first step, getting started, realizing that, oh, wait, you really can go far balancing on just 2 wheels. It's a thing. It's not magic. Other people can do this. They could teach you how to do this. That opens so many doors. For me, it was like, oh, wait, this is actually possible. This works. And then I started watching for other opportunities that were always there, right? So I mentioned that game, and I said the inner circle is just you keep going round and round. You make the money, you spend the money. You make the money, you spend the money. And then one of the concepts was once you get outside of that, opportunities come up that were always there, but you just didn't know about them. And I had thought, oh, that's BS. That never happens. That never happens. So I went and made myself some free business cards. I don't know. There was a company back in the day where you could get 200 business cards for free if you did whatever. So I got some business cards that said I was a landlord or whatever I put on them. I don't know. And I remember I was raking the yard. I think it was our second property. And I had gone around and told each of the neighbors, because I'd heard this on something, tell people you're an investor. Like, I don't feel like an investor. Like, just tell people you are. Like, okay, this feels like such a pretender, I just, So I was like, oh, fine. So I went and met the neighbors because I wanted to be a good neighbor as a landlord. People think that all landlords suck. Some do. But I went to my neighbors and I said, hey, look, I own this house now. And if my renters get out of line, I want you to tell me because I want to be a good neighbor. I want to make this neighborhood better because I bought it, not worse. And I had met the neighbors across the street. So I'm out raking the yard at my place, getting it ready for new tenants. And they came up to me and they kind of looked both ways, but like it's a sheepish thing. They're like, so we're going to sell our house. Do you want to buy it? And my mind just about exploded because all of a sudden this thing, because up till this point, guess what? Nobody had walked up to me and said, do you want to buy my house? Like it just didn't happen. I didn't think that was real. I thought that's just fantasy stuff. Like that stuff doesn't happen. And guess what? It does. But you have to put yourself out there. You have to say, this is me. This is what I do. And all of a sudden, these opportunities, back to our other analogy, colors, they are there and they do appear, but they're not until you put on the glasses.
That is incredible because it's something you hear. And then to see that proof in the pudding, to be like, what? I had something very similar to where you hear, well, send out these mailers and tell people you want to buy their house. It's like, okay. So I remember sitting in my very first property and I went, well, now I have a dog. And my first property was a townhome, so it did not have a fenced-in backyard. And I knew what was happening in my community. And I knew that they're across the street, so even closer to the lake, I knew that it was not so good condition right then, but I knew what was happening around it. We were building $1 million condos along the lake. We were building an event center across the street, and I knew what was happening. So I was like, you know what? Why don't I just try to see if anyone in that community wants to sell a house with a backyard so then I can just move there. I started to understand the power of getting an owner-occupied loan. So I was thinking, well, I could Airbnb the place. I'll move across the street and only put 3 to 5% down. I could totally come up with that amount of money. Let's try it. I remember watching some Netflix special, and I was binge watching it while handwriting the outside of the envelopes. I typed up the inside, but I wanted a handwritten outside of the envelopes. So there was that personal touch. And there were 67 properties, I think, across the street. I just sent a letter to all of them. And at first, the first week or two, I was like, nothing. I don't have a call. Nothing's in the mail. What's happening? I'm like, I guess this was pointless, but whatever. It only cost me, however much for the envelopes and the stamps. And then 3 weeks later, I get a call, and it's the original owner of the house. And I call her Grandma Shirley. She was so amazing. But she was like, Kristi, I've lived in Carson now for 7 years. I've had that property at the lake, and I'm done being a landlord. She's like, so I'll meet you up there this weekend and you see if you like it. I was like, wait, what? What just happened here?
I know, right? It's like, is this happening? Help, what? Like, I'm rolling, I'm picking up speed.
She's like, your dog wanted a backyard, right? Because I put that in there. I said, I'm trying to get a house for my dog with a backyard. I live across the street, but here, so like I put the story in. And I was like, yes, ma'am, I'll see you there. And I was like, Kaya, please be on your best behavior because I really think this would be a great deal. So Kaya comes in and Grandma Shirley sees Kaya. Kaya runs in the backyard and goes and starts playing. And granted, the house it's an amazing story for another day, but it was in rough shape. But because I had already invested in other properties, I wasn't scared of the rehab that was required.
There you go. Because you saw it work. And all of a sudden you're like, wait, this works. And that's what we wanted to share with you in this podcast episode is that this works. Until you kind of get your head around like this works and how this works. And this by the way, this happens continually. It's like, oh, I bought my first place. Shoot, what if I bought a 4-plex or an 8-plex? Or what if I bought a portfolio? Or what if I did a syndication? These are all levels that are scary at first, right? But once we build this momentum and once we realize the tool works, it kind of turns a light on. And that's what we want to share with you. This reminds me, I'll tell you a joke in closing, is that Oli gets a job in the woods, and he's going to be getting a job cutting down trees. Oli and Lars. See, I'm Norwegian. That's the thing. We do Norwegian jokes, right? So Oli and Lars get a job. And Oli and Lars go out and they're both given a chainsaw. And Oli comes back and says, Lars, how many trees do you cut down? I cut down 20 trees. And Lars goes, oh, I only cut down four trees. That's hard work. Oli goes, okay, well, just try harder tomorrow. So they go back out. Oli comes back, says, I cut down 22 trees today. How many you cut down? He's like, oh, I cut down only 3 trees today. This work is so hard. And Oli says, Lars, let me see your chainsaw. What's wrong with you? And so Oli goes over and pulls the thread, and Lars goes, what's that noise? Okay? If you don't know how the machine works, you think like, this is so hard. This is so terrible. This takes so much effort. But once you learn how the machine works, that's real estate. Is people think only rich people do real estate. Nope. They got that way because they know how the machine works. And the machine did the work. They worked the machine, but the machine did the work. That's a super common misconception. But once somebody does a deal and they realize, wait, that's how the machine works. There's active income. There's appreciation. There's tax benefits. There's debt pay down. There's opens doors to other opportunities. It's like, that's what's going on. And we want to share that, yeah, it seems scary, it seems difficult, but it can be done. It's an incredibly powerful machine. And hey, if we could do it, you could do it.
Guys, well, that's it for today's episode of the Real Estate Pessimist, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.